Russia probe. An ex-Trump advisor turns himself in. We have reaction from the White House and Capitol Hill. Spain divided. New developments in the ongoing fight for Catalonia's independence. Rethinking Europe. Pope Francis calls on Christians to help the continent become a community again. And the sound of faith. Bells ring for the first time in 5 decades at a historic church in India. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, October 30th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. 2 former Trump campaign officials turned themselves in this morning. They are the first arrests made in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe. We will get reaction from the White House and Capitol Hill coming up. But first, information about the indictments. Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort surrenders this morning at the FBI field office in Washington, D.C. He and former campaign deputy Rick Gates are the first charged in connection with the ongoing investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. It was launched in May. Questions of collusion between Trump campaign officials and Russia during the 2016 election have clouded the first year of the Trump presidency. But Mueller's probe has cast a wider net, scrutinizing financial and real estate dealings by Trump associates, including Manafort's work for the former president of Ukraine. These initial charges, including conspiracy, do not cover any activities related to the 2016 campaign, but it's possible charges could come later. Additionally, newly unsealed records today show George Papadopoulos, a former foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign, has pleaded guilty for making false statements to the FBI. A source close to the White House said charges against Manafort and Gates have nothing to do with the president and nothing to do with any relationship to Russia. Manafort and Gates have pleaded not guilty to all charges. Manafort has been released on $10 million bond and placed on house arrest. Gates's bond was $5 million. President Trump says alleged misdeeds by his former campaign chairman took place years ago, and he insists there was no collusion between his 2016 campaign and Russia. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump is distancing himself from today's charges. At the White House briefing, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders downplayed the development, saying most of the alleged crimes occurred before the aides worked for Trump.
Today's announcement has nothing to do with the president, has nothing to do with the president's campaign or campaign activity. The real collusion scandal, as we've said several times before, has everything to do with the Clinton campaign, Fusion GPS, and Russia.
I pressed Sarah Sanders for the president's reaction to news last week that, despite objections from the administration, an underage girl who entered the country illegally was permitted to go through with an abortion.
Sarah, last week the administration opposed a federal judge's decision that allowed an undocumented teen immigrant to have an abortion. Now that that case is over, it's been decided she's had that abortion. What is the White House reaction to that decision, and does it set a dangerous precedent going forward?
I can't comment on the specifics of that at this point.
At all? Did he comment on it?
I didn't speak directly with him about the case.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions is weighing in on this case. He told Fox News that by the time Department of Justice lawyers started filing an appeal to the judge's order, the teen immigrant had already gone through with the abortion. Sessions said he was disturbed by that development. Lauren.
Mark, let's go back to the Russia investigation. Questions continue about whether the president would fire Special Counsel Robert Mueller. What is the White House saying about that today?
Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says there is no intention or plan to make any changes to the special counsel. She also added that the White House expects the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election to conclude soon. We'll see.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. Those charges are reverberating around the Capitol, and that's where we find Jason Calvi standing by. Jason, how are lawmakers reacting?
Some Democrats say, Lauren, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The Senate's top Democrat says the indictment shows the investigation is progressing in a very serious way. Senator Chuck Schumer says it shows that someone from the Trump campaign was indeed contacted by a Russian official about getting dirt on Hillary Clinton.
The stakes could not be higher. We're talking about the pride and wellspring of our grand democracy, free and fair elections, which have been going on for more than 2 centuries, and were disturbed and adulterated by a hostile foreign power with no good intent for the people of this country.
House Speaker Paul Ryan says the Republican agenda won't be derailed. House GOP is unveiling their big bill to reform taxes this week. And in the Senate tonight, they're taking a procedural vote on Amy Barrett. She's the Catholic judge who was asked about her faith during her confirmation hearing. Today, Senate leader Mitch McConnell was one of many GOP senators not speaking about the indictment, but he did speak in defense of Amy Barrett.
Professor Barrett happens to be a Catholic. Her faith is important to her. She's spoken freely about it and its impact on her life. But she also understands the role of a judge, which is not to let personal beliefs dictate how cases are decided.
Still, Republicans cannot escape the Russian investigation. Tomorrow, executives from Facebook, Twitter, and Google will be here to face questions about how to fight Russian online propaganda. It comes as several congressional committees are investigating Russian interference into the 2016 election. Lauren?
You're going to be busy tomorrow following up on Amy Barrett and Facebook, all of the Russia investigation. But let's go back to that. It sounds like a lot of lawmakers are keeping quiet about this. Is anyone else talking?
A lot of Republicans are keeping quiet. I know many of the Democrats in the House have been tweeting all day about these indictments. But the Republican chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, is praising Robert Mueller for following a law requiring agents of foreign governments to register with the United States. He said the laws need to be enforced fairly and consistently.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you. We will talk more about the Russia probe coming up later in the show with former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli. Defense Secretary James Mattis and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson testify on Capitol Hill on the need for a new war authorization. It comes after a deadly ambush in Niger, which ignited a push among lawmakers to recast the legal parameters for combat operations overseas. 2 Navy SEALs are being investigated in the death of a Army Special Forces soldier. Army Staff Sergeant Logan Melgar was found dead in June at the U.S. government compound, and that is in the African nation of Mali. The investigation into this death has put a spotlight on America's military role in Africa. U.S. forces are present in more than 50 countries in Africa. Kenya declares a winner in a repeat presidential election.
I hereby declare Mr. Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta.
President Kenyatta wins an election for the second time since August, but he says he expects the opposition to challenge the ruling in court. The main opposition leader told his supporters to boycott the repeat election over fears it would not produce a credible result. Spain's state prosecutor says he will seek charges against members of Catalonia's now ousted government, as charges include rebellion, sedition, and embezzlement. This is following a move by Spanish officials to dissolve the Northeast region's government, the government that wants to secede. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby joins us with details. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Spain's top prosecutor has not said whether he wants the Catalan president put behind bars, but if he's found guilty, he could face prison time. It comes after a failed attempt by the regional government to break away from Spain.
El Ministerio Fiscal
Spain's chief prosecutor, Jose Manuel Maza, calling out Catalonia's main political leaders. He says they have total contempt for the Spanish Constitution, adding they're responsible for the current crisis and an illegal declaration of independence. Tens of thousands of people marched this Sunday in support of Spain's central government. Some Spaniards are calling for the president of Catalonia to be thrown in jail. But Carlos Puigdemont has declared the split official after a controversial referendum on October 1st. Putting a halt to the move is Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy in Madrid. Rajoy has fired Puigdemont, dissolved the parliament, and called for a new election on December 21st. Puigdemont has since left the country for Brussels, but it's not clear if he's seeking asylum.
Well, I don't know. I cannot confirm you.
A spokeswoman for his political party says separatists are not backing down, and they're getting help from other parties who are vowing to push for independence. Catalonia is located in the northeast part of the country. The region has its own unique language and culture, but has long been a part of Spain. Lorenzo Dionís, who lives in Catalonia's capital city, Barcelona, says for a while he worried the ongoing protests would turn violent.
I personally was afraid, amongst other friends of mine and family, that everything would still go towards an illegality, and the police forces would have to charge or do their jobs in order to reestablish the legality in the region.
Now, Dionís says luckily it did not come to widespread violence, although there have been smaller clashes with law enforcement in the last month. He says over the weekend the tension has died down and he now feels safe to walk around outside. Lauren.
It's a predominantly Catholic country. What are Spanish bishops saying, Wyatt?
Well, the Archbishop of the area, Barcelona specifically, has not commented specifically on the politics in Catalonia, but he has asked everyone and come out with comments to pray for peace and called for respect for law enforcement so that no one gets hurt. Now, in addition, Pope Francis, the Holy Father himself, often speaks about teamwork, coming together as a community, but Pope Francis himself has also not weighed in specifically on the politics.
And we'll hear more about Pope Francis and what he has to say about Europe coming up. Thank you, Wyatt. Pope Francis says that Christians can play a role in shaping Europe's future by promoting dialogue in politics.
Qual è la nostra responsabilità in un tempo in cui il volto dell'Europa?
The Holy Father was addressing European political leaders at the Vatican. He says politics is becoming a forum for clashes and conflict. Francis said Christians can contribute by emphasizing that Europe is not just made up of institutions and statistics, but of people. Sally Axworthy is the British ambassador to the Holy See. Welcome to the program. She joins us from Rome.
Thank you.
What did you take away? Thank you. Good evening. What did you take away from the Pope's speech? I really liked that he talked about the voice of dialogue and how important it is to ask people to remember that it's people, not just statistics.
For me, I think the interesting thing about this speech was it was a bit of a kind of call to mobilization for Christians to get involved in the public debate about the future of Europe. One of the phrases that struck me was that he said that religion is seen as a private matter in much of Europe, but it needs to contribute to the public debate and be out there playing a role in society. So I think his previous speeches have been on Europe have been to the heads of state and government, and when he received the Charlemagne Prize. But this time he was talking to the Catholic bishops, to Catholic activists, to politicians, civil society, and he was really encouraging them, I think, to go out there and to shape Europe so that it's the sort of Europe that they want.
You know, Britain is in the process, as you know, breaking up with the European Union. How does the Holy Father's appeal apply to the United Kingdom?
So one of the things that struck me about his speech was that he was talking about Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals, and he was talking about our shared values and our shared heritage that had made Europe great. And as you know, the United Kingdom is in the process of leaving the European Union, but we're not leaving Europe. And those things that bind us together will still be there. So we will still be working closely with our European partners.
Give us a snapshot of your role as a diplomat to the Holy See. What goals do you and the Holy See share?
So we work together with the Holy See on our common objectives. So those are mainly the global moral issues where we're both campaigning, really, such as the United Kingdom is campaigning to eradicate modern slavery and human trafficking. And you may know that our Prime Minister recently hosted a meeting at the UN General Assembly with other world leaders to talk about how we could do that better. And that's something on which Pope Francis has also spoken. So we work very closely with the Holy See on modern slavery, but there are other issues like trying to end violence rape as a weapon of war. The UK has been running a campaign for 2 or 3 years now to try and eradicate sexual violence in conflict. And there's a lot of scope for working with the Holy See on that. Often the religious sisters are people who support the victims of sexual violence. And we recently, for example, did some training for religious sisters in the Congo.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Sally Axworthy, British ambassador to the Holy See.
Thank you.
The Vatican is hosting a conference next week aimed at trying to head off a threatened nuclear confrontation between the U.S. and North Korea. Leaders from the United Nations, as well as ambassadors, will attend meetings to promote a nuclear weapons-free world. Pope Francis prays to the Virgin Mary that the faithful may live out the greatest commandment to love God and our neighbor.
Il grande comandamento dell'amore di Dio e del prossimo.
Speaking at his Sunday Angelus address, the Holy Father reflected on Sunday's reading on the commandment Jesus gave to love your neighbor as yourself. Francis stressed that God, who is love, wants to love us, and he wants us to love others. That is his dream. Coming up, analysis of the Russia probe by former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli. Plus, Hurricane Maria recovery efforts, why Puerto Rico is canceling a $300 million contract. A federal judge blocks President Trump from changing the government's policy on transgender people serving in the military. In August, the president announced his intention to reverse course on a 2016 policy that allowed troops to serve openly as transgender. The Trump administration could appeal. Reaction is pouring in from all sides here in Washington on the Russia probe. Representative Adam Schiff is the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. That panel is also conducting its own investigation into possible collusion with Russia and the Trump campaign. Here's part of what Congressman Schiff is saying about today's charges. These developments will and may have already generated new lines of inquiry for the special counsel and could provide invaluable insights on core issues we are investigating on the committee. Joining us now is Ken Cuccinelli, former Attorney General for the state of Virginia. Welcome back to the program.
Good to be with you.
These indictments led by Robert Mueller reveal what? There's nothing in here from the original intent of the special counsel.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, they really should have been brought by a different prosecutor in the Department of Justice. Mueller should have handed these things over. But let's face it, Manafort and his sidekick here, Rick Gates, they have had years and years of, assuming the indictment's correct, of tax evasion uncovered because he became the campaign manager for the Trump campaign. I know,
in 2016. That's right. There's nothing in here about collusion. So what do you think Mueller is doing? Do you think that he's applying pressure on Manafort to help get more information?
Let's start with just the basic truth. It appears to Mueller and the grand jury that these offenses took place, and therefore they're going forward on them. Okay, just basic prosecution. You and I have already commented we think it's outside the jurisdiction of the special prosecutor. That doesn't mean it isn't appropriate to prosecute. So that's one. But two, yes, it is leverage, or it can be leverage if there's anything there to leverage. There's no real evidence, even publicly and speculatively, yet that there is any organized collusion.
And that's exactly what Donald Trump says in his tweet. Sorry, but this is years ago, before Paul Manafort was part of the Trump campaign. But why aren't crooked Hillary and the Dems the focus? What do you think this suggests, this whole report? Does it suggest that he doesn't have anything on collusion?
Well, certainly with respect to Manafort and Gates, it does. There was one other indictment that didn't much get noticed.
Papadopoulos?
Correct. Mm-hmm. And all it was lying to the FBI. Mm-hmm. It could be nothing. It could just be lying to the FBI during the course of an investigation, or it could be the first item in a string of items, because he really is a small fry in any theory of Russian collusion. So, but we still haven't seen, we've seen 2 indictments now, and we still haven't seen any suggestion of actual collusion, not even a hint of it.
At a minimum, do you think that the president at the time, the candidate, used bad judgment by hiring Manafort?
Well, certainly as someone who was involved in that campaign, I worked for Senator Cruz in the latter stages of the campaign. We were all kind of scratching our head. He has worked at this level. I mean, but it's been since 1996. And, you know, unconventional Donald Trump, and they were having their concerns with Corey Lewandowski. So where do you look? With 16 other players on the field, you're not going to necessarily go to one of their teams. So
right.
It was unusual, but not beyond the realm of possibility.
Of what happens in these kinds of campaigns.
Exactly.
Because as you just mentioned, that this is from 2006 to 2015. So if he had played in those levels in the late 1990s, he wouldn't have had these sort of these issues.
That's right. Well, he took his business in another direction, as we're now learning.
Made 18 million according to this indictment.
Least.
All right, thank you so much for your insights.
My
Ken
pleasure.
Cuccinelli.
Good to be with you.
Thanks. Georgetown University says it encourages open dialogue as it reviews a complaint against a campus group that is pro-traditional marriage. The Jesuit University's statement says in part that the group, Love Saxa, quote, is one of many groups with positions that affirm the teachings of the Catholic Church. We also support a climate that is welcoming to all students and supporting of our LGBTQ communities. Hurricane-ravaged Puerto Rico scraps a $300 million contract with a Montana-based energy company. Ricardo Ramos, the head of Puerto Rico's power company, says the cancellation will delay work by 12 weeks. The contract had been questioned because Whitefish Energy Holdings had only 2 full-time employees when it won the contract. It says it brought 350 workers to Puerto Rico, 500 more expected. 70% of that island remains without power. Up next, the Me Too campaign. More high-profile cases of sexual misconduct in Hollywood. We'll talk to Haley Halverson of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. And ringing of bells. For the first time in 5 decades, we'll bring you the story. Today is the feast day of Saint Alphonsus Rodriguez. He was born in Spain, married at 26, but lost his wife and 2 of their children by the time he was 31. He joined the Jesuits as a lay brother. He died in the year 1617 at the age of 85. The flood of sexual harassment claims continues from media to Hollywood to corporate America. Just today, NBC fires Mark Halperin, a political journalist, after sexual harassment allegations against him. Yesterday, actor Kevin Spacey apologized on Twitter after being accused of trying to seduce a 14-year-old actor 31 years ago. Spacey used that occasion to announce that he has decided to live his life publicly, quote, as a gay man. Joining us now, Haley Halverson, Director of Communications for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
We also just learned that Netflix has now canceled House of Cards, which is the Emmy Award-winning series that he stars in. It will pick up, it will cancel after this 6th season that's coming up. So is that good or bad?
Well, I would say that it's a step in the right direction, but a lot of the times this is really just scratching the surface on what accountability would look like for these production companies. Companies like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and HBO are still really normalizing themes of sexual entitlement to women's bodies through what they create.
Let's talk about that. In this, according to IndieWire, a source for film and TV news, there were 17 scenes of total rape or attempted rape during 7 seasons of Game of Thrones, which I don't watch, but apparently is another very popular series. Does Hollywood have a responsibility to stop showing those?
Absolutely. You know, while the optics are right, a lot of these corporations will condemn an individual who has sexually abused another person, but they're still normalizing these themes and inculcating our culture with these themes through what they're creating. So they absolutely need to address that.
Now to the workplace. In the workplace, as we just reported, a political journalist has been let go from NBC News because of alleged harassment. 48% of employed women say they have been sexually harassed at work. And me too, hashtag me too, we'll get to that too. That's according to a Wall Street Journal NBC News poll. So tell me, what steps can women do to shift the culture? We saw actress Alyssa Milano start that hashtag #MeToo social media campaign.
Absolutely. Well, one thing they can do is to speak up about their experiences, to push for reforms of policies in their workplaces, but also to hold the cultural actors accountable through potentially dirtydozenlist.com, where they can take action against HBO executives, asking them to stop normalizing these themes through their production.
Have you ever been sexually harassed?
I have. Hasn't everyone? You know, I was just talking with people earlier before the show. I think every woman has experienced some level.
I feel the exact same way. Every single woman I talk to says, oh yeah, me too.
Me too.
Interesting. All right, thank you so much. Haley Halverson, Director of Communication for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Finally tonight, celebration at a 120-year-old Catholic church in India. Bells rang out at the church for the first time in a half-century. It happened this weekend. Church members gathered to celebrate a new bell, which weighs more than 230 pounds. The original bell was damaged during an arson attack 50 years ago in 1967. People from other faiths, including Muslims and Hindus, joined to mark the event. According to tradition, St. Thomas the Apostle brought the faith to India in the 1st century. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Until then, good night and God bless you.